Hi, it's Amy from Amarina Designs, and today I'm here to walk you through my brand new mitten pattern. This is a super fun, versatile pattern that you can be used in 3 different ways, and today I'm going to show you all 3 methods for finishing this project. The first is using all felt and some embroidery floss to create some fun, cozy, warm felted designs. You can use fabric, a little bit of felt, and some fusible adhesive to create some flat versions that would be perfect for topping gifts or as a banner, or you can use this quilted method, which doesn't have any raw exposed edges and is a really fun way to embellish wreaths. All of these can be used for garlands or gift toppers, and they are all really fun, easy projects. The pattern I will share, the link to that pattern that can be found in my Etsy shop in the description below, as well as some of the materials and supplies that I use. And so let's get started sewing our mittens. The first pattern that we're going to work on is the felt version of this mitten pattern. When I'm working with felt, I really like using freezer paper. It's my favorite method of transferring patterns onto felt. But if you have other preferences, you can use whatever method works best for you to transfer patterns to felt. But I'm going to walk you through how I do it using freezer paper. The first thing that you'll do is print or trace the pattern onto the paper side of your freezer paper. So one side is a little waxy, one side is more papery, and so you'll want to trace it on this side. Now, I like to use sheets that are already cut so that you can just run it through your home printer. I will link to the brand that I have purchased and used in the show notes. But if you use a different brand or, again, a different method, go ahead and do that. So you'll first trace it. Then you want to cut around, leaving a slight margin around the edge of your pattern. It's much easier to cut right on a line than right next to a line. That being said, the pattern that comes with this mitten pattern is actually, there's 2 sides to 2 different mittens. There's a front and a back to 2 different mittens. So depending on how many you're making, you may decide to go ahead and reuse these freezer paper templates, which you totally can. It just means that you will have to cut right next to instead of through the line when you go to use it the second or third time. It's a great way to keep reusing that pattern, or you can just keep printing as many as you need. So once I have it traced around, leaving a slight margin, I'm just going to put the waxy side against the felt, and then using an iron on a wool setting, I'm just going to place my freezer paper on the felt. And then it just takes a couple of seconds for that pattern to stick to the felt. Then you'll take a pair of scissors and you're going to cut it out right along that traced line. And you'll end up with a piece just like this. And then once it's like that, then you can just peel off the freezer paper from your felt, and then your pieces are ready to use. Once you've decided and have all of your pattern pieces cut out, then it's time to embellish our pattern piece. Now, my tip here is to just use a little bit of a glue stick to hold your pieces in place, especially when you're working with narrow pieces like these little 1/4-inch stripes on this argyle pattern. It really helps to hold it in place while you're stitching. So what I will do is take a piece of felt, and I'm just going to put just a little dab of glue. You don't want a ton, but just enough. And then I will position it into place onto my felt. Now you'll notice here that my stripes are a little longer than they need to be. And that's because I like to kind of play a little bit with it. Sometimes I like them closer, sometimes further. And so what I do is I will glue them into place, and then I will take my pattern and turn it over. Now I haven't pulled the felt off of here because, or the pattern piece, because it's easier to trim it if you have a little bit more body to it. And then I'm just going to take a pair of scissors, and then I'm going to use the pattern to help me trim the edges of those embellishment pieces so that it goes right along the edge of the mitten. And then it has the right shape. And then once you've glued all of your pieces into place, then it's time to do your stitching. What I like to do is use a coordinating piece of floss. I will use just 1 strand of that floss, and I will stitch around all of my embellishment pieces. So in this polka dot case, I've decided to use a running stitch to stitch those down. On this version, I have used a little whip stitch to stitch down all of the pieces. You could use a blanket stitch or any other kind of decorative stitch that you want, but you just want to stitch around all of the edges of all of the embellishment pieces that you put down. And then on this Argyle one, I use 2 to 3 strands of a contrasting floss to add this little detail in the center. You could add like a row of stitches to the center of this stripe one. You could add French knots or whatever you want. When I am stitching down all the embellishment pieces, I use 1 strand of a coordinating floss to stitch those down. That way those stitches just kind of disappear. Once you have all of those pieces stitched down, you're going to want to also position your cuff and put that into place. So I'm going to show you a trick for doing that. I'm going to take this piece that we are working on, and I'm going to take my first cuff piece, and I will just, again, add a little bit of glue. I'm going to position that into place however I want it. If I want it lower on my mitten or a little bit higher. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to take the back piece of my mitten and put it right on top of the other mitten piece. And then I will take my second cuff piece, and again, I'm going to put some glue on it. And then I'm going to use the cuff on this previous piece to position it so that they are in the same spot on both sides of my mitten. Once I have both of my cuff pieces in place, while I'm doing all of my embellishment stitching, I'm also going to stitch down just the bottom part of the cuff on both sides. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to place my 2 felt halves wrong sides together, excuse me. And then you are going to stitch around all of the edges of your mitten. Now, where I have some of these polka dots coming off, what I will do is take my needle and I will angle it through so that it's coming through both layers, but that my needle isn't bringing the thread through the actual polka dot felt, if that makes sense. But I'm going to back up just a second. You want to start your stitching a little bit higher than where that cuff piece ends. So I will start stitching my mittens together about right there, stitch all the way around, and then come to the other side and stitch just past the bottom of this cuff, maybe a 1/4 of an inch or so. That way it's all the way sealed up when you go to do the sides. And again, you will use a coordinating thread for that. So in this case, I would use a red. Once you have it stitched all the way around, you're going to stuff it just very little with some fiber fill. I don't like it super firm. I like them to be a little bit flatter, but I like it to have some body and shape to it. And then you are just going to finish stitching around the top of your cuff. But you'll notice that I leave this bottom corner kind of open, which is why we extend the stitching of our mitten a little bit past. And that way it gives this cuff just kind of a nice rounded edge on the bottom and just kind of more of a rectangular shape to it. So I will start stitching my cuff here, come up and around. When I'm about most of the way through the top, I'll add just a little bit more stuffing into that top cuff piece to make sure that it's got a nice body all the way around, and then I'll finish off my stitching at the edge of the cuff. If you want to turn this into an ornament while you're stitching across the cuff, you could go ahead and add your hanging loop right there. Or sometimes I'll just come back with a needle and I'll put it through where I want it to. If I'm using this as a garland, a lot of times I'll just take a longer needle and I will run my needle through the back of the top part of this cuff so that it hangs from the front. And that is how we do the felt version of these mitten ornaments. Now we're going to work on the flat version of these ornaments. I think this is a really fun look and a really easy, straightforward way to make a really cute garland. Plus, you can use whatever fabrics you want. So if you're trying to feature a certain line or print, you want to make something that coordinates, this is a great way to use fabrics that are easy to coordinate and match with whatever you're working on. The first thing that you're going to want to do is to cut a piece of Heat and Bond Light or some other fusible adhesive that you can sew through. I cut these to a little bit more than a 5-inch square, right around a 5-inch square, which gives me enough space to both have the mitten and have some extra to create all the embellishments in each of the colors of fabric that I'm using. Now, depending on what you're doing, you may want to make your piece bigger or smaller. If you're only doing the mitten out of one specific fabric and then you're going to do the embellishments out of a different fabric, you may not want to just like waste this much space. But with these ones that I'm doing, I'm pretty sure I'm going to use most of this. Once you have your Heat and Bond cut, you're going to cut a piece of fabric that's just slightly larger. And this is really just to protect your ironing surface, to make sure that you're not getting any of that adhesive on your iron or on your ironing board. Then you're also going to need a piece of felt that coordinates with your fabric piece. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. You could use just white to back all of your fabrics if you want. I'd like it to be close, but sometimes it's hard to match exactly. And it's really just a matter of preference for you. Once you have it fused to your fabric, then you are going to make sure that you follow the manufacturer's instructions for fusing. And then you'll peel off the paper backing from your adhesive. You'll place it onto the top of your felt. And then again, you'll use your iron and whatever the manufacturer's instructions say for heat settings and time, and you will fuse that fabric to the felt. Once that's fused, you'll have a piece that looks like this. So you have felt on one side, fabric on the other with the adhesive in the middle. And then you will use your pattern to cut out the shapes that you're going to use. Now, in this case, I am using freezer paper like I did in the felt version because we're working with felt here and it's a really fun, quick, easy way to do it. You could trace it onto the felt with whatever method you want. You could use a stapler version or whatever version you like for transferring your pattern. Fuse it to the back side, the felt side of your project, and then again, use your scissors and cut it out right along the line there. The next thing that you're going to do is, again, add your embellishments. So this is a lot the same as the felt method. So you can pull off your freezer paper pattern, take your embellishment strip, glue it into place, and then continue adding your layers. Now, we're going to use our sewing machine to sew around all of the different embellishment pieces on here. So when you're doing layers, like on this argyle piece, before you put these diamonds on top, I went ahead and sewed around the stripe underneath, and then I added the diamonds on top and then sewed them down in order to get all of the sewing lines where I wanted without having to start and stop at each of those different intersections. So that's a little bit of something you may want to think through if you're layering your pieces. Once you have glued into place and sewn around all of your pieces, then I will add my cuff. And again, I will sew around the cuff like normal and also make sure that you sew around the entire edge of your mitten just to secure that fabric to the felt. And it gives it, I feel like, a really nice finished look. Now you could add another piece of felt to the back of this and make it a little pocket. You could add your string here for hanging it. Or I really like to use this with twine and mini clothespins to hang them in a garland. These would be super cute for toppers for gifts and different things like that. It's just a really fun, different look to these mittens. The final method for utilizing this mitten pattern is to create quilted mittens. And I really like these. They have a fun finished edge, and they are really darling to use, whether, again, you're using them for gift toppers, ornaments, garlands, to embellish wreaths. And again, it's a really fun way to tie in some fabric. If you're trying to make some coordinating accessories, you could toss them into dough bowls, use them as fillers in bowls, or just individually for displays like on tiered trays and things. There's another fun way to finish it, and that is to utilize small scraps to create a quilt as you go piece to create the front. and then finish your mitten the same way you do just the regular quilted pieces. So let's get started with our quilted mittens. The first thing that you'll need is some fusible fleece, or you could use batting scraps and basting spray. But fusible fleece is a super easy way to get this look. You want to make sure that you put the side with the adhesive towards the wrong side of your fabric, and then you're going to fuse those two pieces together. You'll need a front piece with the batting or the fusible fleece and the back piece. Then you're going to take your piece with the fleece and take it to your machine and quilt it up. And I like to just use a really wide, it doesn't need to be super tightly quilted. It's really just to add kind of a fun, interesting element to this. Then you will take your mitten pattern and you're going to trace it on the wrong side of the back piece of your mitten. And I like to just have my pattern piece go right up to the top so it's one less edge to draw, but you can do it however you want. You'll put your quilted piece and your back piece right sides together, and then you're going to sew around your traced line, starting at the two top, at one top corner all the way around to the second top corner. Make sure you back stitch at the beginning and the end. And you're going to sew right on this traced line. So if you wanted to add embellishments to, like say, add the argyle to it or stripes or whatever, what you would want to do is trace around your pattern about 1/4 of an inch and cut it out so that you can know where to place your embellishment on your quilted piece. I like to just keep them really simple, and that means that it's really straightforward. You can just take your two rectangles, sew right on your traced line, and then you're going to cut it out. So you see I've sewn here right on my traced line. I'm going to use some scissors to kind of trim up the edges, and then I like to use pinking shears around my curved edges here just to be able to have some notches in it so that those curved edges sit more neatly. So I usually start at the top and I take my pinking shears, go around this curve. You want to make sure that you're getting close to but not through your stitch lines. I go around the thumb and then up and around this top. Now, if you don't have pinking shears or you don't like using pinking shears for this, just make sure you clip a few notches into these curves here. And then the other piece that you really want to pay attention to is this point right here where the thumb meets the mitten. And you want to cut out as much of that fabric as you can. Again, you want to make sure that you don't snip through the seam, but you want to get a really nice notch in there. And then you are going to turn your mitten right side out. And it's pretty straightforward. It seems like it's small, but it's not terrible. Even the thumb hole and stuff is not, I've done worse, I should say, when it comes to turning things. It does help if you have a blunt turning tool, like a chopstick or some kind of pointer tool. And then I will take it to my iron and give it a nice press to make sure my seams are all pushed out, especially up here at the top. So once you have your mitten turned right side out, and this one is actually already pressed, then you are going to take your two pieces of felt and your pattern piece. Now I like to have my pattern piece, again, this is on freezer paper because this is felt, and I fuse it right to my felt. And again, I'm just using that bottom edge there so that I don't have to worry about one more edge. And then I sew around. I start at the end of this curve here, back stitching up and around the top curve, across the top, around the second curve, and then stop before this bottom curve here. Again, back stitch at the end of your stitching. Then I will trim down my seam allowance all the way around, and then I cut out this bottom curve. This is where my stitching starts, and then just cut straight out. That way I have some nice loose little curves on the bottom of my cuff for my mitten. So once I have my seam allowance trimmed, I'm going to turn this right side out. And again, a turning tool is usually handy for these curves. Felt has some stretch, so you want to take advantage of it to get you nice, crisp, seams and curves, but you also don't want to mangle it. So be as gentle as you can, but make sure that you get the shape you want. So once you have it turned and flattened, you kind of press that seam allowance there. Then the last thing that you will do is take your mitten and slide it right inside that cuff. And I like to just kind of push it so that that top seam is kind of resting on the top of my mitten. Then I'm going to take some liquid fabric glue and I'm just going to run a line of glue under the edge of both the front and the back cuffs to glue that down so that it stays in place. Now again, when you are at the sewing stage of your cuff, if you wanted to add a loop for hanging it, you could do it there. Or again, you could just use a needle and some thread or twine to add a loop once you're finished, once you decide if you want to hang it at the center or on the corner or however you want to hang it. So that is the quilted version of this mitten pattern. I hope you've enjoyed making these mittens with me today. They are such a fun, versatile project. I can't wait to see the ones that you make. If you've enjoyed this project, I hope you will like and subscribe my channel and continue to watch for new tutorials from me. I'm Amy at Amy Rooney Designs.